The most powerful decision of the last century wasn't made on a battlefield. It wasn't voted on, and almost nobody living under it was even in the room. It took less than an hour, and it still controls the world today. If you've ever wondered why so many conflicts keep returning to the same places, why borders in one region feel wrong, unstable, almost artificial, this story explains why. Not through ideology, not through politics, but through one quiet decision made behind closed doors that was never meant to last. In 1916, the world was on fire. World War I was tearing Europe apart. Millions were dying. Empires were collapsing, slowly, painfully. One of those empires was the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, it had ruled huge parts of the Middle East. Different religions, different ethnic groups, different languages. But by 1916, it was weakening. And Britain and France knew it. They didn't see chaos, they saw opportunity. Far away from the trenches, far away from the people who actually lived there, two men met in private. One was British, one was French. Their names were Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot. Neither of them lived in the Middle East. Neither of them would ever have to live with the consequences. But they were about to redraw the entire region. The problem they wanted to solve was simple. The Ottoman Empire was going to fall. Everyone knew that. The only question was, who would get what after? Britain didn't want to fight France later. France didn't trust Britain. So they decided to plan the future in advance. No negotiations with local leaders. No understanding of tribal boundaries. No concern for religious tensions. Just strategy, oil, trade routes, control, and speed. They laid out a map, not a detailed one, not a culturally informed one. Just lines, straight lines. Lines that cut through deserts, cities, tribes, and centuries of history. France would control the north, Britain would control the south, and everything in between would be managed, controlled, divided. This became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. At the time, it felt logical, efficient, temporary. But this is where most people get it wrong. While Britain and France were secretly dividing the region, Britain was also making a completely different promise to Arab leaders living under Ottoman rule. They promised independence, freedom, self-rule, a future without foreign control. And many people believed them. They fought against the Ottomans. They helped Britain win the war. They never saw the map. After the war ended, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and suddenly, the secret agreement became reality. Borders appeared almost overnight. Countries were created that had never existed before. Others were split apart unnaturally. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. States built not around identity, but around control. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a blueprint for instability. Take Iraq as an example. Iraq wasn't one nation historically. It was three regions, three identities, three very different power structures. They were merged into one country because it was convenient, not because it was stable. When violence erupts there today, people blame religion or culture, but the real problem was structural, and it started in 1916. Here's the part most people never hear. Sykes and Picot didn't think they were doing something evil. They believed they were being practical. They assumed borders could be adjusted later, fixed, improved. They believed power would always manage the chaos. They were wrong. Because once borders exist, they become real. They create identities, conflicts, claims, and undoing them becomes almost impossible. Even today, the shadow of that decision remains. Some extremist groups openly talk about erasing the Sykes-Picot borders, not because they know the history, but because they feel the consequences. A century later. Think about that. One decision, less than an hour, still shaping wars, alliances, and headlines today. This story isn't really about Britain or France. It's about power, about how decisions made far away, by people who won't live with the consequences can echo for generations. And it leaves us with an uncomfortable question. How many systems around us today were never meant to last this long? And how many problems we blame on the present were actually locked in place a century ago? Because this is just one example of how the world we live in was quietly designed. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. Thanks for watching. There's always more behind stories like this. In the next videos, you'll discover more stories and facts you didn't know. See you in the next one.